Hello and welcome back to Round the Table, episode 49. From the meeting point, broadcasting not only to Bilbao, but throughout the world. And this week we have been talking about humour and senses of humour, what we laugh at. We were discussing jokes, different types of jokes, who we make jokes about. We were discussing stand-up comedy. That is when one person is on the stage with a microphone. That is called stand-up comedy. And if anybody has been to a stand-up comedy event, and if anybody would like to try being a stand-up comedian. We also discussed our favourite comedy films and comedy books. There are many funny books out there to read. There are also sketch shows on TV where a team of humorous actors portray certain characters in sketches, or skits as they are sometimes called. We also discussed practical jokes. Practical jokes are typically putting a bucket of water over the door or doing something like that which potentially puts another person in an embarrassing situation or in a small amount of danger, maybe. And then we discussed cartoons, two different types of cartoons, really. There are the drawing cartoons that you see in comic books. There are children's comic books, there are more adult comic books, and sometimes in newspapers you get a cartoon strip or a comic strip. Like Snoopy, remember Snoopy, the Peanuts cartoons? That would be a comic strip, or Garfield, something like that appears in newspapers. But there are also the animated cartoons, like The Simpsons, for example, that you watch on TV, and a very good programme that is. One of the questions in the book this week was, do you laugh at other people's misfortunes? Meaning, if you see somebody fall over in the street, or when somebody has an accident, if somebody walks into the door, do you laugh at them? And we decided that this is not so funny as you get older. You do a lot of laughing at this kind of thing when you're younger. And the theory that we came up with is that as you get older, you are more aware of how serious these accidents are. Because when you're younger, you can fall over and you don't usually get hurt. But once you get past a certain age, falling over is a very serious thing. So maybe we tend not to laugh at other people's misfortunes when we get older. Another question was, is humour international? Now, I should have changed the question to, is all humour international? Would have been better. Because we decided that everybody in the world must laugh at something. We presume that everybody has a sense of humour. We don't always know what people in other countries laugh at, but we presume that more or less the same things. There might be a few differences. So, for example, not all humour would translate, because there are some things like playing with words when words have double meanings. The joke would not always translate into another language. And there would also be certain cultural references, things that people in other countries just wouldn't understand because it's part of your culture. And for you, it's a very typical, obvious, everyday thing, but to other people it would be completely alien, so they wouldn't understand it. But they would probably have similar things in their own culture. So, for example, the way we often laugh at other cultures, often our neighbours or even people from another part of our own country have a stereotypical character, let's say. So it might be people from one part of the country might be considered quite stupid or silly, and another part of the country might be very tight-fisted or stingy or miserly with their money. People who don't like spending money are stingy, miserly, or tight-fisted. So those are the stereotypical personalities of people from different parts of the country, which probably apply to most countries. I imagine in Germany there are areas in Germany with similar stereotypical behaviours or stereotypical characters, and probably in every country they have areas that they make fun of. And there would also be ridiculing authority figures, like we make a lot of jokes about politicians, for example, or aristocracy, or generally the people up there in charge. We should be able to make fun of them because that's what we do in a free society. Although there might be some countries where that doesn't happen. And there might be other countries where there are certain taboo subjects or restrictions that culturally they just don't make jokes about certain things. So we figure that the majority of humour would probably be the same in most countries. And we spent some time discussing satirical cartoons, which are very important in a free society and part of our freedom of speech. And we were looking at the text in the book about satirical cartoons, which were very popular in the 18th century. They were quite popular in a lot of British cities. They would ridicule the politicians of the time and the king and the Prince Regent. Another typical type of humour, as I mentioned earlier, is the play on words. We were discussing what actually is a joke, and in a lot of jokes it is the fact that words can be interpreted in different ways. Often there's homophones, for example, where you say the sentence, you have the introduction to the story, and at the end of the story, which we call the punchline, is the final part of the joke, is the punchline. It often gives an unexpected twist, so the story suddenly changes. Quite often you have a quick change of juxtapositions in jokes, where you think the joke is about one thing, and then usually because of a double meaning of words, the meaning of the word suddenly changes at the end. So we get this unexpected twist and this play on words, which I will demonstrate.
My dog's got no nose.
How does he smell?
Terrible.
So this first joke is a very, very old one. My dog has no nose. How does he smell? So the whole joke here is based on the idea that smell can have two meanings. One is the thing that you do with your nose when you smell something. You smell something to see what it smells like. But the other one, to smell, is to give off the smell, okay? To have an odour. So my dog has no nose. How does he smell? Meaning, how can he smell if he doesn't have a nose? And the punchline is terrible. Means he smells really bad.
I bought a radio the other day. It had a broken volume control, but it only cost £2. I couldn't turn it down.
This second joke is a play on words with the double meaning of the phrasal verb. So to turn down something. You see, this radio doesn't have a volume control, or it has a broken volume control. So turn down is to reduce the volume of something. But turn down is also to refuse an offer. So this radio was only £2. It's very cheap. So it means I couldn't refuse such a cheap offer. So it's a double meaning of turn it down. And now it's time we did something a little bit more serious. wasn't too serious for you, but it was something I saw about 2 weekends ago and I had to put it in the video for you. Anyway, back to comedy. The cultural influence of comedy. Yes, and there are many phrases that come from comedy routines and shows on TV, sketch shows particularly. And in the same way as we have key phrases which are often coming from the Bible maybe, or some expressions that come from Shakespeare became common phrases that we use all the time. Likewise, there are many phrases that come from comedy routines that everybody knows. Again, people in other countries might not know the references, but you'll hear many people say things like, "Don't mention the war," "When I were a lad," and now for something completely different, or "I have a cunning plan." These are all phrases that come from different comedy shows, which people in England know very well. And then today, this was not something we discussed in class last week, but I was thinking this morning about the influence on sciences. Yes, comedy has had an influence on sciences. Now, this is a very interesting thing. There is an American cartoonist called Gary Larson who used to do a series called The Far Side, which was very surreal humour. And in one of his drawings, he has a group of cavemen, primitive people in a cave. And one of them is showing a picture of a stegosaurus, the dinosaur, the stegosaurus. And he's pointing at the tail of the stegosaurus, where those spikes are. You know, it's got 4 big spikes on the tail. And the caption is, well, the man is saying, "Now this end is called the thagomizer, after the late Thag Simmons." Now he calls it the thagomizer, this spiky tail thing, after the late Thag Simmons. So we presume that Thag Simmons was killed by a stegosaur. And he gives it the name thagomizer for this part of the animal. Apparently, if you are studying paleontology, if you are a collector of dinosaur bones, they now call that part of the dinosaur a thagomizer, which is very funny, I think, named after Thag Simmons. The fact that the caveman has a very normal English surname makes it extra funny, I think. So you can look for that cartoon. It's by Gary Larson. Type in Gary Larson Far Side Thagomizer and you'll find it. I can't show you this here because of copyright reasons, otherwise I would. Another comedy show that influenced science was a program called Not the 9 O'Clock News from about the 1980s, early 1980s. And in that one, there was a sketch called the Talking Gorilla, or Gerald the Gorilla, in which a professor has taught a gorilla to speak. And in this, the professor says, "When I first met Gerald," and he talks about his flange of gorillas. The professor uses the collective noun flange for a group of gorillas. And the gorilla next to him says, "It's a whoop of gorillas and a flange of baboons." And apparently, people now that study these animals use a whoop of gorillas and a flange of baboons as the correct collective nouns. And they were just words that were made up by this comedy team on a TV program. But the people that study gorillas and baboons thought they were amusing words, so they kept them. So comedy, again, influences science. And a third one, which I heard on a philosophy program on the radio, comes from a program called Only Fools and Horses, from a sketch called Trigger's Broom. There's a character called Trigger who cleans the roads. He sweeps the roads with his broom. And he gets a medal because he's had the same broom for 20 years. And he says he's had it for 20 years, the same broom, but it's had 17 new heads and 14 new handles. And this is very similar to an old philosophical question about Theseus's ship, in which, this is going back to ancient Greek times, when this Theseus character has a ship and it's repaired so many times that none of the original ship exists. Everything on the ship has been replaced. And the question is it still the same ship? Anyway, the philosophers now refer to Trigger's broom as the same question, which is very funny. And now it's time for some pronunciation problems. Look at this collection of words: baggage, cabbage, garbage, package, passage, village, message, savage, advantage, courage. All these words end in ij, ij. Now, a lot of these words, probably all of them, have their origins in French. And in French, the word baggage would sound bagage, wouldn't it? Bagage, with a age sound on the end. Now, either because these have been in English for a long time, or maybe it came from a Norman form of French and not the French that we know today, we have this ij pronunciation on the end. Whereas with these words, camouflage, mirage, massage, collage, sabotage, montage, these have the more French sounding age ending on, because they've only recently come from French and we haven't had time to make them sound like English words yet. So they have the age ending, camouflage. There is one peculiar one, garage. I say garage. Some people say garage. There are two pronunciations. You can make it sound more English or you can use the more French sounding pronunciation. I think in America they say garage a lot more than garage. I think garage might be a very more working class English sound, I think. Garage. And one more that came up this week is the difference between slip and sleep. Yes, it's another one of those with the short I sound and the long E sound. Slip, sleep. If you saw someone slip in the street, it's not the same as someone sleeping in the street. And let's have some typical mistakes. Someone this week was talking about someone who was dressed in sunglasses. And I said, no, this person is wearing sunglasses. You can say wearing sunglasses, but not dressed in. If you change the word sunglasses for a suit, you could say she was dressed in a suit or she was wearing a suit. So if you're using clothes, you can use dressed in as well as wearing. But if it's sunglasses, you can only say she was wearing sunglasses. Another one that I've been thinking about recently is the fact that a lot of people here like to use the word Occidental as the opposite of Oriental. I've never heard any English-speaking people say the word Occidental. We always say Western. Now, I was checking my Chat GPT and it says that instead of Oriental, I thought instead of Oriental, maybe Eastern is more common, but apparently Asian is the word everybody should be using these days. So ChatGPT doesn't like Oriental and it doesn't like Eastern. It likes the word Asian. And the opposite of Asian is Western. Another typical mistake we've seen 100 times before, my actual job. Okay, don't forget actually is not the same as that Spanish word that looks rather similar. You're talking about your present job. if you're talking about the job you have these days. It's not your actual job, it's your present job. Okay, that's your typical mistakes. Let's have what's the difference? Carriage and wagon on a train. Normally you have a carriage. That is where the people are. We do have wagons on trains as well, but they tend to carry produce or goods. You have a goods wagon. But if you're talking about where the people are, we say the word carriage. The next one is title, headline and highlight. A title. A title is of a book or a film or something like that. It is the name of the film, would be the title of the film. A headline is what you see on the newspapers. It's the main title of the story. It gives you a few words that summarize the story to catch your attention. That's the headline of the newspaper. A highlight, well, there is the verb to highlight, is to emphasize something. You also have a highlighter pen, those fluorescent pens that you use to mark a text, to highlight the most important parts of the information. You could also use highlight as a noun. If you watch like a summary of a football match where they, instead of showing the whole football match, they only show 5 minutes of all the best bits, that's the highlights. Bar and counter. If you are in a bar or a pub, where you get served or where you pay is called the bar. That's why we use the word bar for the building now. A counter is usually in a shop. And I was thinking maybe in shops these days you don't really see counters very often. But in the old-fashioned shops you paid at the counter. A bar is where you get the drinks in a pub. Fabric and factory. Fabric is usually what something is made of, and normally we use it for making clothes. So the cloth that you make a shirt out of is fabric, and a factory is where things are manufactured. And don't forget that manufactured, that manu bit in there, does not refer to your hands anymore. It used to in the past, but now it's nothing to do with handmade things. Factory produced things are quite the opposite. Costumes, customs, accustomed and customer. Costumes are what you wear. If you are dressing up for a party, if it's carnival and you dress like Superman, you are wearing a Superman costume. You can also have traditional costumes. If you like to wear a kimono, for example, that would be a typical traditional Japanese costume. Customs are things that you do as a tradition in your country. Those are the customs, those traditional things you do. It can also be the place where you show your passport, when you go through the customs when you arrive at an airport. Accustomed is, of course, a related word, which is when you are used to doing something, when something is very normal for you, or it is not a problem anymore. And a customer, of course, is also related. That's someone who buys things in a shop. We also have the word client, but that's normally in offices. So if you buy things, you are a customer. If you buy services, you are probably a client. And finally, this one confused me. Somebody wanted to know the difference between infectious and contagious. And to be honest, I didn't know because I'm not a doctor. Apparently, if something is contagious, it is spread from person to person directly, not via another source. So all contagious diseases are infectious, but not all infectious diseases are contagious, my chat GPT tells me. So an infectious disease is, for example, malaria. It goes via mosquitoes into people. Or typhoid goes via the water. It doesn't go directly from one person to another. Whereas sexually transmitted diseases go directly from one person to another. They are contagious. They don't go via another source. That was complicated, wasn't it? As I say, I'm not a doctor. Ask your doctor these questions, not me. I'm only a poor Englishman. Anyway, that's all we have time for this week. So, don't forget, next Friday, everybody, we've got an open evening, a Super Friday special session with tortilla and cheese and beer and wine and all kinds of other wonderful things. So if you're around in Bilbao, don't forget to come on down, put your name on the list. We might have 4 people, we might have 10 people, I don't know. But we'll just be sitting around and discussing probably what's going to happen next trimester, and also what we're going to do with the podcast. This is number 49. I said I'd do it for a year and then see what happens, so we need to make a decision soon. Anyway, if you're not in class this week, you can listen to me again on the podcast next weekend. Until then, have a good week. Till next week. Bye.